Then you just mute it.
Good afternoon and welcome to our Care Partner presentation this month. We have the pleasure of having Jennifer Brown here, the Community Relations Manager at Seabury Resources. And she's going to talk about care in the LGBTQ plus community. Insight is very happy to have her, and we really hope that you learn a little bit from this and also learn a little bit more about Insight as well. We have adult day centers. We have early stage reconnections programs. We have education classes and support groups. So please feel free to look at our website at www.insightmcc.org. Now I'd like to welcome Jennifer.
Melissa, thank you very much. Hi, I'm Jennifer Brown. Thanks, am I in the right spot? I am in the right spot. Good. I am very happy to be here this afternoon. I want to thank Melissa Long. I want to thank Insight Memory Care for hosting this presentation and allowing me to spend time with you today. I'll start with just a little bit about who I am. I am a 73 to be 74-year-old queer adult woman. I have been in the older adult services world locally here in the DMV over 20 years. I have 50 years in the healthcare industry. And starting back in the 80s, we really are dating ourselves. I started getting involved in gay activities and civil rights and advancing gay and queer civil rights, and participated in a number of programs, events, retreats, meetings, conferences from the 80s going forward. You'll find me on LinkedIn. You'll also have additional contact information at the end of the presentation. I'm not on Facebook, I'm not on Instagram, I'm not on Twitter. I actually observe those platforms, but if you want to communicate with me, I'm happy to hear from you. You can go through LinkedIn or you can use the contact information at the end of the presentation. So as Melissa indicated, we're going to talk this afternoon about the LGBT community. And to be honest with you, I know we have a number of folks on the Zoom call this afternoon, and I don't know your level of experience, your involvement, your knowledge. So up front, I want to say this is sort of the ABCs. We're going to get into a little bit more of the details, but we are starting kind of the baseline of knowledge information. Melissa's going to monitor the chat. Please, please, please enter questions, enter comments, enter observations, disagree, whatever you wish. And Melissa will feed me that information. You know, I don't want to stand here and just talk at the camera. I really hope that you hope to participate and engage and interact. So we're going to come at this from the older adult perspective. I am going to discuss certain factors in regards to services for queer older adults, specifically memory care, but other related aging services. As Melissa had put out in the flyer, we're going to get to resources. So sort of at the latter part of the presentation, I will talk directly about resources here in Northern Virginia, DC, nationally, etc. So the question is kind of, why are we here? What's the point? The point is that older adults, for a variety of reasons, have unique and special needs. And a number of older adults that are from different communities have special needs and expectations for support services from the healthcare industry, support and guidance and care from their loved ones, from their family members, from their friends and neighbors. And to be blunt, many older adults have lived very guarded lives most of their life. So they have, the vernacular is very old, been in the closet for way too long. And so when they are interacting in the general public, in family settings, and particularly with the healthcare industry, there tends to be a lot of guarded, cautious communication and interaction. So we're trying to kind of break down some of those barriers in terms of your personal relationships, in terms of your social or business relationships, in terms of your interactions with your healthcare providers. Okay, we're going to go through the ABCs. Like I said, we're going to start with the basics and build from there. So the vernacular is LGBTQ plus IA. The pluses can go on. Being someone of my age, we started out with the basics, with the basic 5 letters, if you will. I'm going to use the term queer. I'm going to use that in a positive way. Every group that has been in a difficult social position has had different slurs and language used as being derogatory, critical, and queer was a word like faggot. Again, I'm showing my age. Language which was considered very derogatory at its time. And in the community, queer has been reclaimed as a positive identification. To identify as a queer person is not a derogatory, it's reclaiming the power of language. So I hope no one feels left out, but as an umbrella term to make this work, we'll use queer as a general reference point. Okay, again, the basics of the acronym: lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgendered, queer, and questioning. I actually was at a presentation, and the original Q was questioning, as being, I don't know where I go, where I fit, what I'm comfortable with. So questioning was a very apt term, kind of outdated, to be honest. And we know in today's, in 2023, the community has a broad umbrella. And again, I try to use queer as all-inclusive, not as exclusive language. A couple of the basics that you hear a lot of right now, and I think very important to everyone's well-being, is the concept of an ally. An ally is a person who does not identify as queer, but is connected to the queer community through family members, through loved ones, through work colleagues, through their work requirements or their social engagements. And they feel they stand in solidarity with the queer community. And allies are critical for everyone's success. And that is an umbrella term of anyone who, I'm not an individual who experiences queer life, but I am an ally, I'm an advocate, I'm in solidarity with you. Cisgender, which is a relatively new term, is for heterosexual male, cisgender female, someone who's identifies, lives as a what we would call a straight person, or a cisgendered person, or someone who is not part of the queer community. Gender expression, we're going to get into a lot of gender identity. We can't help it. It was on the news this morning here in Virginia. It's in the news in Maryland. It's all over the national landscape. I want to try to minimize the politics. We can't avoid it, but I don't want to, frankly, get into a political debate here this afternoon, although I think political debate is critical and essential, but we're not going to spend a lot of time in that space. But gender expression, gender identity, transsexual, trans are the current battlegrounds, for lack of a better word. Gender expression is how you present yourself. What do you look like? What are the markers in your dress, in your jewelry, in your makeup, in your demeanor? That's a gender expression. That's someone, we all put on our clothes every day, go to work, go out for lunch, spend time with our friends. Whatever we do, we put on our uniform, we put on our clothes, and we all know that clothes can be very, very powerful forms of messaging. So gender expression is how you present yourself to the world. Individual choice. Gender identity is how you see yourself. Gender identity is you perceive yourself to be a predominantly female person, predominantly male person, or a person whose gender identity is referred to as fluid, which for some of us older folks, fluid gender identity didn't quite exist when we were younger. Neither did the concept of non-binary. Non-binary is a reference to someone who does not see themselves either on the feminine end of the spectrum or the masculine end of the spectrum, and they feel comfortable, or where they are comfortable is not being pegged at either end of that feminine masculine paradigm. That's non-binary. That reflects gender identity. That reflects itself in gender expression. And I know some older adults, when they see younger kids who would, if you ask them, would say, I'm non-binary, you may be uncertain on what pronouns to use, how to address them, how to interact with them. We're going to touch on that a little bit as well today. Being outed, again, a somewhat dated term, but still relevant. Being outed is when you have knowledge of someone being a queer person and you're communicating that to others without the queer person's permission, knowledge, consent. Just because you're close to a coworker or a client and you know they've confided in you and whatever the interaction is, you know they are a queer person. That does not give you license to go to the next individual or to your coworker or to the neighbors down the street and say, you know, that couple down the block, they're not roommates, they're queer. That's not cool. It's the province of the individual to communicate. Now, some people who are out and are sharing their personal lifestyle with you may be totally open with you acknowledging their lifestyle to anyone. But you got to check with the individual. Don't assume because they told me it's open game for everybody else. One, two. Okay, I referenced about non-binary. We've talked a little bit about non-binary, non-conforming. You know, you're kind of splitting some linguistic hairs here. Someone who's non-binary or non-conforming, or does not identify strongly as a male or a female. Non-conforming is a little more of an aggressive stance. I maybe have been born XYZ body, but I'm not conforming with that body. I conform with something else. I don't find anything wrong with it, but it's saying I was this or I was born this, but I'm not complying with the standards of that. So I am non-conforming. I want to get something clear about sexual orientation, sexual identity, and gender. Sexual orientation is who do you feel attracted to? Who gets the blood circulating? Who's driving up the blood pressure? Where is that energy coming from? You're sexually attracted to someone. That is your sexual orientation. That's who you'd like to spend time with romantically, intimately. Your sexual orientation and your gender identity are separate entities. They're not the same. And although this may get to be a little more confusing, a cisgender person is generally understood to be someone who is attracted to the opposite sex. So if I'm cisgender female, I'm attracted to cisgendered men, and vice versa. A queer person, a lesbian, a gay man, a trans person could be attracted to a gay man being other men. They also could be bisexual and have relationships with men and women. Same thing with a lesbian woman is fundamentally sexually attracted to other women, but may have sexual experiences with men. A trans person we should probably back up, a trans woman and a trans man. So by definition, a lot of this political blowback right now is around these issues of birth gender, birth identity, and life expression or life evolution. A trans man is a person identified at birth as a female. Their birth certificate came out and said female. And over time, that individual began to believe, understand, feel, acknowledge that they are not female in their bones. They are really masculine or more manly. And they will present themselves, transition to being a trans man. Flip side, for a young boy who is identified at birth as a male, learns as they become a little older that their spirit is much more feminine. They are much more comfortable in feminine space and feminine activities, and they will transition to be a trans woman. In both of these scenarios, that transition is very individualized. It can be highly medical, hormone, surgery, various different activities to help that transition take place. It can be less medical. It can be more oriented to clothes, behavior, dressing, and less medical intervention. And with some folks, you will experience them somewhere in the middle. They may be headed towards more medical intervention, but they're not quite there yet. Or they're not comfortable with the medical intervention. Or there may be specific things about their health where the medical intervention may not be as safe, for lack of a better word. So the trans man is a individual who is identified at birth as a girl, who evolved to be a man. And a trans woman is an individual who is identified at birth as a boy and evolved to be a female. Questions?
We have a question from Jessica. Can't someone be cisgender and homosexual, bisexual? You identified cisgender as someone who is heterosexual.
Yes, the short answer is yes. The language, and that's a very fair observation. A lot of this language fails currently in our 2023, where individuals have opportunity to engage and express their life and express their feelings and emotions across a spectrum. And Jessica, that's a fair comment. I think in the current common vernacular, when you hear someone state cisgendered person, or that's a cisgendered person, or I'm a cisgendered person, they are trying to communicate some kind of parameters. But you're right, the boundaries are pretty wide open. Okay. So I need to move along. I don't want to spend too much time right here. So, but the point of sexual orientation is who you're attracted to, and where you're coming from is not the point. It's who you're attracted. Who are you going to, and that's your sexual orientation. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I keep going the wrong way. All right. Sorry, guys. All right. We're going to go through a little history, a little background. And I preface my remarks. I didn't want to get into the culture wars too deeply. But I think what's important is if we have family members, if we have loved ones, if we have clients, if we have coworkers, understanding where the queer older adult came from and what their life experience has been is very important to your ability to connect with that other person, no matter what your role is between each other. As a professional, as a neighbor, as a coworker, as a family member, you need a little sense of what did I grow up with? What did they grow up with? All right, the legislation laws against queer behavior go way back, certainly before 1714, but at the very beginning of the United States, there were sodomy laws. And that was brought over with some of the folks that came from Europe and began to colonize North America. We had the introduction of sodomy laws. What was recently, I think there's either a public television, a public radio program, I think it's a public television program, about the lavender scare, the onset of the purging of federal employees, government employees here in the DMV because of their queerness. So to take a step back a little further, what you had was after World War I, pre-World War II, into World War II, with the expansion of the federal government, and particularly with the run-up to World War II, you had a large migration of folks from all over the country coming to the federal capital to work. Folks who either would not serve in the military, did not want to be in the military, did not qualify in the military. And although women in World War II obviously served in the military, it wasn't as broad as what was going on with the men at the time. You had a lot of queer people from Kansas come into DC. And I'm not picking on Kansas. What you had was folks who grew up anywhere, the Midwest, the South, and they knew they didn't fit in. And they knew that one of the ways for them to survive was to get out of Dodge. And a lot of people migrated here to the DMV. And a lot of people were able to secure good federal jobs, were able to receive the benefits of a federal employee with the stability and with the income and with the benefits that came with that. Well, what you began to have post-World War II, after the horrors of World War II were beginning to subside, and America was, now going into its incredible baby boomer growth mode, you began to have activities in the political space around all of these poor choice of words. Some folks within the federal government and elsewhere who were being identified as security risks, as communists, as folks who were not reliable, not trustworthy, fundamentally seen as easy blackmail targets. So the lavender scare, which occurred back in post-World War II, was a concerted effort to purge our US government of these, language became very ugly, these perverts, these deviants who are in our government work system, and who needed to be removed from their jobs because they were not decent, law-abiding, nice, true blue American citizens that should be working for the FDA or wherever they are. Now, mind you, I just referenced the sodomy laws back to 1714. There were laws all over the country. Homosexuality was a crime, period. End of discussion. In the faith communities, it was a sin. In faith communities, it was hell and damnation. In faith communities, it was an abortion. I want to be careful with my words, not get too loaded. But there was not a lot of space in American society writ large out of the beginning of the 20th century, let alone back into the 18th century, where homosexuality was extremely looked down upon, ridiculed, belittled, and found unacceptable. So this caused folks who lived anywhere to seek out space where they would have a little more opportunity to survive. What became the worst part of the Lavender Purge was the McCarthy hearing, which lasted from 52 to 54. Senator Joseph McCarthy from the beautiful cheese state of Wisconsin was all over the press, at times getting television and newspaper coverage for his haunting of not just queer people. Obviously, he was fighting communism in its core in our government, and queer people are caught up in all of that. There are two characters, one who everyone in the DMV knows because there are buildings, Mr. J. Edgar Hoover, who was the head of the FBI for many, many years. And I referenced Roy Cohen. Roy Cohen was Joseph McCarthy's chief of staff and was later to be a mentor to the former Mr. Trump. I will go on a little tangent on this, which I find most difficult and still today. I think the history will demonstrate that J. Edgar Hoover and Roy Cohen were queer men, okay? And they hated their own. That self-loathing destroyed the lives of many, many people. So if I'm an 80-year-old queer person and I grew up in this DMV and I experienced what J. Edgar Hoover did and what Roy Cohen did and what Joseph McCarthy did, and people lost their jobs, lost their livelihoods, lost their health insurance, lost their homes because they were hunted down and harassed and fired because they were queer. So the 80-year-old today lived through that. And what did they bring to us today? They're guarded. They're very, very careful about trusting anyone. They're secretive because they know what happened to their friends. They know what happened maybe to themselves. And they know what they experienced. We're half hour in. We got 90 minutes, right? Is our framework? Okay. Please raise your hands if you want to jump in. 1969 is the watershed of the beginning of the modern gay rights movement. There was gay organizations at a very modest level prior to 1969. There wasn't that there was no one organizing, but it was pretty low key. The Stonewall riots occurred in Greenwich Village in New York City in the summer of 1969, when the New York City police, on the behest of the mayor to do a little publicity, was going to round up all the queers and throw them in the paddy wagon and take them downtown to the jails. which happened all the time. This wasn't anything by itself, which was terribly unique. The Stonewall was a dive bar in Greenwich Village, basically managed by the mafia. By that I mean the alcohol, the cigarettes, all the revenue was controlled by organized crime. And periodically, the mayor, I'm blanking on the mayor at this point, you had to wind up, doing a little street cleaning and getting folks, getting these perverts and deviants and into jail, which was literally like a 12 to 24-hour experience, but popular. The patrons of the Stonewall bar refused to go quietly into the night. And what happened was 24 to 48 hours of public demonstrations in Greenwich Village against police harassment and in favor of gay and queer rights, or the beginning of gay liberation. That became much more prominent. You had the beginning of marches, you had the beginning of protests, you had the beginning of some advocacy for changes in legislation, and you had the beginning of a movement. What happens next is backlash. And I'm pulling out Anita Bryant. She certainly wasn't the only one, but she was a very, very prominent spokeswoman for traditional American values, phrase that just did not pop up in the last 20 years, around the fact that, and this is being repeated today, that somehow queer people were groomers and somehow queer people were going to cultivate children to be queer. That there's really nothing further from the truth, but that was the position, that was the line. And again, I want to not go down this rabbit hole. There's all kinds of accusations about adult behavior around children, educators, teachers, etc. But this is the roots of it. And Anita Bryant was the face of that backlash at the time. All right, I want to push this along. There we go. All right. And all right. Starting in 1969, kind of the height of the backlash was Colorado passed legislation that prohibited anyone from being, this was a reverse thing. You had an amendment which specifically denied gay and lesbian protections against discrimination. So there was legislation passed in the state of Colorado that said you could not protect gay people from discrimination. In 96, and we don't have to relive all of the Clinton years, Clinton was a pragmatic, and we don't need to revisit all of his foibles, but he was a very pragmatic and at times a successful politician. And there was a lot of pressure in Congress for the Defense of Marriage Act, which was passed in both houses of Congress and signed into law by President Clinton. So now, those 80-year-olds who grow up with McCarthy and Cohen and J. Edgar Hoover were in 1996, and there's laws on the books saying the only people that can be married in this country is a man and a woman. 2000, we're finally beginning to get some movement in a progressive direction. And Vermont is the first state to recognize civil unions. In 2003, the Supreme Court rules against the Lawrence versus Texas law. We talked about sodomy laws going back to 1714, and sodomy laws being across the country, that it was unconstitutional for Texas to arrest and convict Lawrence for the law of sodomy. I don't know all of these details, but basically Mr. Lawrence and his partner were found in dead by the Texas Rangers, who knows what. And they were arrested and convicted of sodomy. They appealed and appealed and appealed and eventually got to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, this is unconstitutional. You cannot arrest and convict someone for having a love act with another consenting adult in the privacy of their home. Faculty, that 70 and 80-year-old person, up until 2003, they were committing a crime in the privacy of their home, committing a crime, a felony, right? That's what they were doing. 2004, Massachusetts became the first state of the union to recognize same-sex marriage. Here we go. Come on, kids. Thank you. 2010. We all know President Obama's story and his impact here and nationally, internationally. He was pretty conflicted about gay rights coming up. But he decided to challenge Bill Clinton's "Don't Ask, Don't Tell" policy for the military, and under President Obama, he officially repealed the "Don't Ask, Don't Tell" military policy, which fundamentally said you can remain in the military, you can serve as a citizen in the military for the safety and well-being of your country. You can't love anybody that you want, or you could, just don't talk about it, act like it, show about it, give any acknowledgement or recognition of your partner, and you can continue to put your life on the line. So President Obama did appeal that. Later, President Obama also endorses same-sex marriage. I believe that should be May 211, not 210. Sorry about that. So he's come a long way, President Obama, he believes same-sex marriage should be the law of the land. In 2013, the Supreme Court rules that the Defense of Marriage Act, which Bill Clinton signed, is unconstitutional. So you cannot limit the right to marriage to only a man and a woman. May of 14, the District of Columbia, our little center of government here, legalized same-sex marriage. 2015, same-sex marriage was legal in 37 states. And in 2015, by 5-4 decision, in a case that is now becoming much more controversial, Supreme Court ruled that under the Constitution, same-sex couples seek in marriage the same legal treatment as opposite-sex couples, and would be to disparage their choices and diminish their personhood to deny them this right. Now, what we know has happened since, what we know has happened since this little bubbling, pulling itself up for me. There we go. Starting in around 2017 to the current day, there's been a lot of effort, both through governmental action and through public policy, to try and roll back and weaken and challenge and push back against the rights of queer people across the United States. As I said this morning, Virginia was in the news on national public radio today. So is Maryland. And over the next foreseeable future, hopefully will be resolved before my lifetime is over. This battle is going to continue, and there's going to be a continued controversy over the rights of gay and queer people. Okay, Judge Thomas. And this is why the energy is so electric at the moment, is after the ruling on right to abortion, Thomas said publicly in his ruling that the landmark high court ruling that established gay rights and conception rights, listen to that, folks, conception rights should be reconsidered now that the federal right to abortion has been revoked. Thomas wrote that those rulings were demonstrably erroneous decisions. So you have a Supreme Court justice, one of the senior members, someone will correct me and say he is the senior member, one of the senior members of the court, is putting in his written rulings that the decision for the right to same-sex marriage is demonstrably erroneous. Okay? All right. The flip side of this is all of the public energy is in the opposite direction, and it is demographics. And I know there's a lot about demographics is destiny, and the boomers are finally going to age out, and the next generations will finally move up and get those boomers the heck out of here. But it is generation. It is generation. And you see, these are general numbers, but the idea is, what's the trend line? The trend line is the younger the person, the more queer and gay life is a part of their life. The TikTok generation, and I'm not trying to be cute about that, has no issues with queer life. It is not where the generations today are. That's not their priority. That's not where they see their energy. Their energy is, we're a multicultural country, we are multicultural people, we have enormous diversity, and we should all get along. And we should all respect each other. So I do believe that in this case, demographics is destiny. And I think eventually the evolution will come where there will always be folks who are uncomfortable with different things. That's never going to change. There's always going to be folks that have beliefs or understand their faith in a certain way or understand their world in a certain way, where this isn't going to be a panacea for everyone. But the bulk of the population is moving in one direction in terms of queer life, and it's a supportive one. The Grammys Sunday night, the couple that won a Grammy, that transgender woman in her red dress and her red veil, that was amazing. We have the elected state congresswoman from Loudoun County is a transgendered woman. We have a secretary of transportation who is a gay man. We have an assistant chief of health admiral who is a transgendered woman. This stuff isn't going to go away, but there is a lot of pushback. There's a lot of energy on the other side, and it can be very vicious. It can be very harmful. It can be very personal. So what does the older adult think? I don't know if this nurse is what she thinks. I don't know what her politics are. I don't know what this doctor thinks. What if I discuss this with them? How is this doctor going to react to it? How is this nurse going to react to it? What's the social worker going to do? So the guardedness that the older adult grew up with is coming back to haunt them, especially in residential communities, especially in residential care, either temporary or long-term. So we have to be aware of that. We have to be sensitive to this. And the population is older adult queer people. They're less likely to have children. They're more likely to live alone. They're less likely to be partnered. The number 3 million plus 65 or above, I think is a modest estimation. And as I said, when we get into the healthcare space, there's a lot of anxiety amongst the client population who is queer about what they're experiencing as they interface with the healthcare industry. And the other part of this is older queer adults are getting older, so what do they need? They need more healthcare. So as we age and we need more help from healthcare, we are more guarded about what that healthcare is all about. And it's all pieces and parts of it. You know, it doesn't, no one's excluded in this one. So one of the things, you know, I've worked in the older adult world for quite a while. And what are these are basics, these are fundamentals. The queer older adult is worried about their safety. They're worried about mistreatment. They're worried about discrimination. They're worried about disapproval. How long are we going to live before we can't get rid of worrying about disapproval? But that's human nature. That's who we are, right? Okay. Now, this is a little bit in the weeds, but if you're a provider of healthcare, if your loved one needs healthcare, if you need healthcare, and you want to try and minimize stress, there are things you might want to focus on. If you're in a residential setting and you get a private room, if you're going into care, if you're receiving care from an institution or an organization, what's their public policy? What do you know about how inclusive they are? There are ways of finding that out through friends, through references, through referrals, through the website. There are regulations through Medicare and Medicaid specifically against discrimination across the whole spectrum of levels of discrimination. It's not just queer people, but there's call outs in CMS and the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid. If you're in a licensed Medicare or Medicaid facility, the rank and file staff all are supposed to be trained and oriented and advised and supervised around inclusivity and cultural sensitivity and acceptance. Now, that's a nice thing to say, blah, 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 blah. And there are realities that you need to be also respectful on the other side. If folks are in the healthcare space that have come from different cultures or different countries, they grew up with something altogether different about queerness. And they shouldn't be, the stones shouldn't be thrown at them either, okay? But they're bringing some real baggage into the conversation. And there's no easy on this. There is no easy. But as a consumer, you need to try and find providers that you believe will give you the respect and dignity you deserve. As a loved one, as a companion, as a family member, as a professional, as a social worker, blah, 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 you need to help your client make sure they're getting the services that are respectful for who they are. All right, a little bit back to the ABCs. I mean, some of this is very old school, and it is becoming more common, certainly in our area of the country. Legal marriage. We now are legally married. Queer people are legally married, period, end of discussion. There's nothing else to talk about. That may not happen. That may not be the case some states of the Union 6-9 months from now. So it's a legal marriage. So any of the facts of the legal rights of the spouse or the legal rights of the spouse, period. You have life partners, especially older adults, who have not been legally married. But their life is as a couple. And in that space, I really, really encourage that you get all your legal documents clearly, completely completed and executed. So there's no ambiguity about who's the power of attorney, Who's the agent? Who's the healthcare partner of attorney? Who's the executor of the will? You got to nail that stuff down. If you're not a legally married person, even if you are a legally married person, we work in care management all the time to make sure everybody's got their legal documents set up, regardless of what their relationships are. Children becomes a sticky issue for some of the queer older adults. As we talked about earlier, we're heading on to 1 hour. A lot of folks in their 70s, 80s may have gone through a prior relationship where there is a child or two or three, and wound up being able to self-actualize, get into the psychobabble, but reach a point where their life needed to evolve and that original relationship ended. We all know about divorce. There's nothing to think about being queer. But so queer adult had a relationship, has 1 or 2 kids, winds up in a new relationship, a new partner, a new marriage, and these kids are there. They're not. They didn't disappear. That relationship can be all over the place. It can be totally estranged, non-existent, no communication. It can be very loving, supporting. It can be evolving. But the key here is the older adult is going to identify and communicate who's important in their lives. Just because the kid shows up at the hospital and says, "This is my father," and the father looks at the guy and says, "I haven't seen you in 30 years. You haven't called me. What are you doing here?" I'm exaggerating that, but it's possible. So you as a provider, you as a caregiver, you as a health professional needs to look at what does the older adult see as their family. It can be biological, it can be family of choice. You got to get that from the older adult, not from the kid who shows up and says, "That's my father." That's not sufficient. Queer families can have their own children, and then you have a blended family, just like any other divorce situation. So the queer couple has children, adopts children through various different options, and they have a family, and they have a legal family with legal kids, as well as these birth folks, and they all can get along. I don't want to make this sound so extreme, but you need, again, to focus on the older adult, their wishes, their priorities. They'll tell you who's important in their life. Okay, so the wrap up is, if you're engaged with an older adult or any person who's queer, and you feel comfortable acknowledging it in some respectful way, then do it. I'm working where I worked for 15 years in older adult residential care settings. I met a lot of people, and if I was interacting with someone or a couple, and my instincts were, this is a gay couple, I would try to find some way to give them some cues, either about myself or my work, or something, so they can understand, okay, this person knows, this person's comfortable. I think that's a risk to take. I think you also have to be very careful, very sensitive, very respectful in how you take that risk with your neighbors, with your fellow congregants in your house of worship. Wherever that venue is, if you feel that you're engaging with queer older adults and you want to acknowledge that and subtly, carefully demonstrate your acceptance, support, go for it. Don't be heavy-handed. Don't be clumsy. Be careful. I think one of the things that in the professional space, you need to advise and communicate with your colleagues and your coworkers. You need to give sound advice to your clients. I touched on the legal documents. I can't emphasize that enough. I think anyone who is engaged with an older adult, either a single person or a person in a relationship, is to really, really clarify that their legal papers are in order, and if not, to encourage them strongly to go ahead with that. You want to engage, and you want to allow your clients, your friends, your neighbors, your congregants, the members of your faith community to express themselves, to have their partners at the office party, to make sure that that little, we are inclusive as part of our corporate policy is a lived reality and not just some language on the website. Understanding. The point of this little exercise is how do we demonstrate more compassion, more understanding, more humanity for each other. In terms of, a work environment, it's a little akin to where we've come with the Me Too movement. You can't have an environment that is hostile to your collective coworkers. You shouldn't have an environment in a school. You shouldn't have an environment in a work setting. You shouldn't have an environment in a house of worship. You shouldn't have an environment where abusive behavior of others is accepted, tolerated, ignored. You shouldn't allow that to be the space that you occupy. And I think, that again is an easy thing to say. It's a very difficult thing to do. But we are reaching a point, and I know it then becomes more, unfortunately, more charged. And because the environment is so charged, we get a little bit more guarded and defensive when we step back. So last night was a perfect example during the State of the Union. And you have people, Congress people, elected government officials, hooting and hollering and yelling at the president. And, I'm certainly someone who believes in a lot of vigorous debate and expression. But it really is a sense of disrespect. And, I think when we're in a setting where we feel another person in our space has been demeaned by another individual or a policy or a procedure, then we should find the courage to challenge that situation. All right, I think we've gotten through the agenda pretty well. No more questions? Any more questions? Okay. I want to get to resources because Melissa and I talked a lot about resources, and we have a number of resources on the slides, and Melissa has paper copies. There's a lot of resources in this area. We have a lot of national chapters, obviously, in the DMV. We have a lot of local resources. We have everything that's geared to healthcare, to business, to activities, to exercise, to sports. There is a DC Equity Chamber of Commerce, a very big active group of queer business owners, queer business leaders, very much modeled like every other chamber of commerce there is in the country. It just is a group that is expressly been constituted to advance queer business owners and queer business activities. The Human Rights Campaign, which is based in Northwest DC, is the largest national political lobbying group in the country. Team DC, I'm a tennis player. I've been playing queer tennis here locally for 20 years. I played queer tennis before I even moved to the district 22 years ago. You can find a queer sports team for anything. If you like cycling, if you like swimming, if you like bowling, if you like running, you can find a group that will run, bowl, play tennis with you, golf with you, swim with you, bike with you. Team DC can give you all of those connections for any of those sports. The tennis folks, organization I'm part of, we play at Fairfax Racket Club right on Arlington Boulevard, Route 50 in Fairfax, right across from Fairfax High School, near Fairfax High School. We play out at Wakefield Park. So there are activities that the organization may be based in DC, but the activities, the events, the programming is in Northern Virginia and not just within the district. AARP has made a real effort to position themselves as being supportive, engaged with queer older adults. PFLAG, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about PFLAG. PFLAG is a very, very active group here in Northern Virginia. PFLAG was founded as a support organization for the parents of queer children and young adults. So, and it became a very, I believe, successful organization because it identified that the parents were really stressed. They were really conflicted. And the parents needed a venue where they could interact with other parents, gain support, gain community, and feel less alone. My generation of parents and the generation of parents that preceded me, having a queer child was an embarrassment. It was something to deny, something to keep in the closet, something not to talk about. It was almost like the concept of cancer 20, 30 years ago. I don't want to make poor analogies. 30 years ago, 40 years ago, somebody had cancer. Nobody talked about it. And of course, that's not true today. But if you were a parent of my generation, and if you were a parent of the generation that preceded me, of the greatest generation, what you had was folks who, if they had a queer child, a child or an adult child, it was something to be embarrassed about. And PFLAG grew out of the sense that these folks need some community. And they are all over Northern Virginia. Fairfax, Oakton, Arlington, Alexandria, Annandale, Sterling, Manassas, Leesburg, Falls Church. They're not all the same chapters, they're not all the same events, they're not all the same program. You're sitting there and you're saying, I'm 67, what do I want to do with PFLAG? Well, there may be some intergenerational programming. There may be some community with the parents. There may be some opportunities for you to volunteer. And these are very local, very local. So you all who live in Alexandria, Arlington, Fairfax, Loudoun, Manassas, Prince William, You don't have to trek into DC to do something. You could actually be involved locally. And there are other queer organizations in Northern Virginia. I don't want to dismiss that, but they generally come out of DC. Capitol Pride is a lot of fun. I know there's Arlington Pride now. I know there's other efforts for other Pride activities in Fairfax County and Alexandria. Pride events is a great way for community, great way to connect, great way to meet other people, great way to socialize. Can be a lot of fun. World Pride 25, which is a big, big deal, is here in the district. This is the International World Pride Festival. This is going to be huge. And if that interests you, you should look into getting involved, volunteering. You're going to have international folks from all walks of life across the globe coming to DC for Pride 25. It's very exciting. The one local bar that I know of, and I'm sure people are going to say, well, you didn't know that about that one. Freddie's Bar and Beach Club in Arlington is a very, very gay-friendly space. And you obviously can go into DC and find plenty of clubs and bars to enjoy. So look, I really appreciate your time today. I hope this was helpful. I hope I was able to communicate some information that would be beneficial. That's the phone number you can reach me at. I see those emails. You can find me at LinkedIn. You can see this is very important to me. And I'm very fortunate that Seabury Resources for Aging is a very true to their word, supportive, engaged, inclusive environment to work in and to be part of. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Just a reminder to everyone, the last Wednesday of every month, we have an LGBTQ support group for caregivers that's in person at our Fairfax location. Jennifer is also going to be back with us later this spring, and we're going to watch the Gen Silent documentary video and do a Q&A afterwards. We'll be doing it both in Fairfax and Sterling, so keep an eye on the calendar. We also have Tim Johnson coming, who authored a book on caregiving with LGBTQ as a spotlight author in June, and so keep an eye on the calendar for that as well. These resources she shared, I will get them put into a blog format and get them up for you guys within the next week or so. But thank you all for joining us, and thank you, Jennifer. This was wonderful.